Do I have to do a voice if I do the Brit?
I mean, I think you have to do your goblin voice.
I'm not doing the goblin voice.
Okay, you're gonna be the American.
I'll be the American.
Okay, sounds good.
But then I'm gonna do John Wayne. I'm kidding.
I'm not gonna criticize you. So, thank you, those of you that have come to this seminar here at GaryCon. It is 6 o'clock on Friday. I have in front of me at least one gaming lawyer who does not work for Azorra Law. Correction from last week. Thank you very much. This is Reading D&D Aloud, and since we are at GaryCon, it seems only fitting to do a special episode of Reading D&D Aloud. So instead of reading from a D&D text, we are going to read from a tranche of documents that were handed to me at GaryCon. A tranche of documents given to me by John Rateliff, arguably the greatest living Tolkien scholar, who was in charge of attempting to acquire the rights to Lord of the Rings for a D&D game in 1992. In August of 1992, he flew to England and pitched the idea to Christopher Tolkien himself, who shot it down largely because Christopher Tolkien did not want novels set in Middle-earth. And TSR wanted the rights to produce a game, novels, and Endless Quest books. Although, to be honest, so when I interviewed John Rateliff about this, he said it was novels. In the tranche of documents that we are going to look at, it only says Endless Quest books, and these were just given to me today, so maybe novels, maybe Endless Quest books, we'll have to figure it out. But I think there's some really interesting stuff in here, so we're going to read these documents aloud. We're going to read them aloud first, so we get through the whole thing, and then we're going to talk about them. Scott, you want to say hi?
Hello. By the way, I learned that we were going to do this literally like 6 minutes ago. So I'm very excited to do that. It's like improv theater with nerds.
I've underlined the important parts, though,
okay.
So that should help. And you're going to be the American from TSR.
Okay.
You are playing the role of David Fox.
Can I do it as Christopher Walken?
Sure.
I'm not going to.
Vice President of Business Affairs. Here you go, sir.
Right.
And please stand here if you can.
Sure.
There you go.
Good
job. You're doing great.
I'm reading everything in pink?
Right, yeah, I would start with date and Dear Miss Butler.
September 18th, 1992. Those were good days. Remember the internet was nice? It's September 18th, 1990. There was no internet. Anyway, it was 1 year into my college. Dear Miss Butler, Lori Battle of Tolkien Enterprises suggested that I write to you to plead my company's case as regards the acquisition of a license to publish Choose Your Own Adventure style game books. Our trademark brand is known as, I'm going to get exhausted doing this, Endless Quest books. I know that you are aware that my company is engaged in negotiations with Lori to obtain the Tolkien license for role-playing games. In connection therewith, we have also asked for the rights to publish Endless Quest books based on the Tolkien property. It is the conviction of our management that these rights are essential to marketing the games to the many dedicated Tolkien fans who may not be game players. The EQ books, thank you for not putting that in quotes, the EQ books are specialty game books. Sorry, the use of literally adventure games packaged in a paperback book format. These books are not prose stories and are intended only to supplement the Tolkien canon, not compete with it. I have so much to say already. We have to complete these, right? Okay.
Yeah, we're going to do it, Scott. We're going to read all of it first, then talk. I'm writing notes down.
Game books will broaden our target audience potential by appealing to younger people, 8 to 10 years. As younger people is 8 to 10 years. And will benefit the estate by increasing interest in Tolkien. Encouraging interest among young readers inevitably will have a positive effect on sales of Tolkien books in general. Here's the money shot. Okay. Our offer for the game book rights is as follows. We will pay a guarantee of $25,000 per year against a royalty rate of 5% of our net wholesale selling price per each Endless Quest book sold, and we're seeking a 5-year license. We think these are generous terms, and obviously the Tolkien estate would have complete approval over the contents of each book.
And then you just read the highlighted parts in the outro.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
We genuinely feel that the EQ rights...
Endless Quest.
But totally means EverQuest. Rights are an important key to success for a line of Tolkien role-playing products. I cannot stress how strongly our management feels about this issue. Blah, 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 blah. We would appreciate receiving whatever help you could give us in convincing the estate to take a chance with us and to persuade the estate that the game books are critical to the successful distribution of the games. I would be happy to answer any questions you might have about our proposal. I look forward to hearing from you soon. Very truly yours, David R. Fox, Vice President, Business Affairs.
29th October, 1992. I'm not going to do an English accent. I could not keep it up. Dear David Fox, I apologize for taking so long to reply to your fax dated 18th September, which I have now had a chance to discuss with the Tolkien estate. I am afraid we are not keen to license adventure game books, and that means the Endless Quest books. We are not keen to license adventure game books since we feel these will not have a beneficial effect on book sales. I don't understand why these rights are thought to be a necessary adjunct to a license for role-playing games. The markets you are targeting, the non-game-playing Tolkien fan, and the younger 8 to 10-year-old reader do not correspond. Our estimate is that the market for The Hobbit is 11 to 14 years and above, while that for The Lord of the Rings is older still. I have difficulty in seeing why you would have to break off negotiations with Tolkien Enterprises because you are unable to secure a license for quest books. Surely the role-playing games are a viable and highly commercial proposition in their own right? ? No doubt you will be in touch with Laurie Battle, to whom I am copying this fax. All good wishes, yours sincerely, Mary Butler, Publishing Director, Tolkien. Copy Laurie Battle. And next for you, sir.
Oh, boy.
And you got to get nice and close.
Fly, good fleance, fly.
There you go.
It's a Shakespeare joke for you.
Macbeth,
Thank you very
Act
much.
3.
There you go. Dear Miss Butler, this letter is in response to your letter dated October 29th, 1992. I'm writing to express our great disappointment with your stated... God, I miss letters. I miss letters, right? Like, think about how long it took to, like, get this, and you're like... You can't, like, instantly respond. You're like, she's disappointed. I will get back to you in a month. I'm writing to express our great disappointment with your stated preference, the TSR, not acquire a license to publish choose-your-own-adventure-style game books, because you feel that game books... will not have a beneficial effect on book sales. Frankly, I thought that I had given you a well-reasoned explanation in my previous letter as to why our management believes that the game book rights are essential to marketing Tolkien role-playing games, particularly with respect to selling role-playing games to Tolkien fans who are not game players. We consider the game books to be a crucial bridge to non-game playing Tolkien fans, an effective marketing tool for generating interest in Tolkien among younger readers who are on the threshold of discovering The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. We are extremely curious to why you take the opposite view to our position. The game books are a vital element in the acquisition of this license as far as we are concerned, and the bottom line is that we do not feel that Tolkien role-playing products will be viable for us without having our rights to publish game books in conjunction with our role-playing products. If it would help persuade you, I would be happy to carry on a discussion with you by telephone conference call at your convenience. I can only reiterate that we want this license, but we cannot see our way clear to entering into an agreement unless we obtain all necessary adjunct rights. Very truly yours, David R. Fox, Vice President, Business Affairs.
8 December 1992. Dear David Fox, I am afraid neither we nor the estate are keen to see adventure game books on the market alongside our own publications. Frankly, we are surprised that you attribute such importance to these products. We find it hard to believe that Tolkien role-playing games are not viable in their own right. They certainly have been in the past. We understood that the market for adventure games books has declined significantly over the last few years, and they no longer sell particularly well. I am sure that an effective promotion campaign for your role-playing games would attract Tolkien fans far more readily than the publication of a style of book whose popularity is declining. From what you say, if you hope to secure a younger market of pre-Hobbit readers, then surely the games themselves are more of a draw than books? We appreciate your genuine interest in Tolkien and hope that you can be persuaded that there is enormous scope in the publication of a line of role-playing games which already have an eager market awaiting them. All good wishes. Yours sincerely, Mary Butler, Publishing Director, Tolkien. End of line.
The MCP has spoken.
All right, now we can sit down.
Please tell me this comes to name calling.
That was frosty, that's for sure.
Right, like that's pre-internet days, and that was spicy.
Absolutely.
You're gonna have to start. I mean, those like reading those letters. I'm not getting an entire sense of like. I
can start.
I'm having a harder time just the fact that there's a human being whose name was, what was it?
David Fox.
No, not
Mary Battle?
Publishing Director Tolkien, not Tolkien Estate, not Tolkien like Industries or LLC, just Tolkien.
So the first thing that might help in making these documents more lucid and clear is discussing briefly the tangled web of Tolkien rights. Tolkien rights were divided between what is today, I think, Middle-earth Enterprises, used to be the Saul Zaentz Company, and the Tolkien Estate. Essentially, Tolkien Estate is books, and the Saul Zaentz Company, Middle-earth Enterprises, is, I think, everything else. Again, it's a little bit confusing, but in these letters, they talk about how Mary Battle is at Tolkien Enterprises, which, as I recall, was the name of Middle-earth Enterprises back in the day. So what that to me says is that the game part of this has been cleared with one of the entities it already needed to be cleared with. But because these are products appearing in book form, they still needed to be cleared by the Tolkien Estate. So for TSR to really have all the rights, they needed to run it by both organizations. When John Rateliff met with Christopher Tolkien about this, he described Christopher Tolkien as pretty upset at the idea of there being other books set in Middle-earth. And when John Rateliff came back and told Lorraine Williams, she was like, well, I guess this isn't worth our time. But clearly these letters tell a different story because these letters would have been written after that encounter. The thing that, just made my jaw drop, and it's a little unfair.
Was the $25,000?
Oh, my God, yeah. I mean,
no, you asked, so we were hanging out earlier today, and I didn't, again, this is kind of surprising that we're talking about this, which is fantastic, because it keeps me on my toes, but is that you asked how much, and it's too late now for us to ask the audience, but I wish we could ask the audience how much would the Tolkien rights be, and I said, I thought $100,000 would be reasonable. I mean, think about TSR in like 1992. They've got they don't have deep pockets, but they've got pockets,
They're
right?
like a $25 million company,
and I think they would be viewing in some terms of like how can we get out of the morass that we seem to be slowly going towards. So I could see them shelling out, but $25,000 is almost a teacher's salary, right?
Yeah. I agree that was the thing that really jumped out at me that was all they were offering, and that was not the problem.
But it's a different world. I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you, but it's a different world.
Tell me about it being a different world,
It's a pre-Peter Jackson world, right? Like, I mean, Tolkien was, we were all alive in 1992. And back then, I don't think that, like, we're beyond our friends, we weren't talking about Tolkien. I mean, the Peter Jackson movies literally changed Tolkien in so many ways. Like, Tolkien was, in many ways, like Dungeons and Dragons, like then people, it's a lexicon, it's a subgenre lexicon, right? So, and I guess that makes it more interesting. I didn't have this thought through, but it's interesting to me because was TSR at that time tried to, if they're not trying to, you're not going to expand outside of the subcultural genre that you already have if you're going to sign Tolkien in 1992, right? We're not signing Sailor Moon in 1992 to a role-playing contract. She was big in 1992.
So, another thing that jumped out at me from these letters that is relevant to what you are saying is, at the time, TSR had an obsession with acquiring a younger audience.
Well, I thought you could say IPs.
No, I was going to say younger.
Kind of expanding.
You can talk about that in a second. Let me talk about the younger audience. Dragon Strike was also aimed at kids as young as 8. Bruce Nesmith, the lead designer, who also went on to do Skyrim, told me that they never had any great success really with kids that young, but they were just obsessed with getting kids that young into role-playing games, and for a pretty good reason, because second edition did worse than first. First edition kind of did worse than basic D&D. Sales had been on a downslide since like 1982. And if you're in a situation where you've seen your sales slide for 10 years, it is not crazy talk to be like, hey, we need to get younger people into this. We need to recruit a new generation. It's not a bad instinct. And frankly, the Endless Quest books might have been a better solution than some of the things they did do, like Dragon Strike. Briefly, I guess this is going on the internet, so I should assume people don't know what Dragon Strike is. Dragon Strike was a D&D board game that came with a VHS videotape explaining to you how to play, but the VHS videotape really didn't do that. It was more like a pilot for a TV show. It's very weird. Go watch it on the internet. If you have not seen the Dragon Strike video, it is worth 25 minutes of your time to see what Lorraine Williams wrought in the early 90s. But, again, it's not a bad instinct. I would furthermore add... No, I'll take a break and let Scott talk.
I know you were talking well. No, you can. But first of all, I just think it's really funny. Like, I was giggling so much because I was like, how are you going to possibly describe Dragon Strike? Like, it's the most insane piece of media.
I can read the part from my book. I feel like I did a good job in there.
You did. You did an excellent. Well, your book was so good because I ended up watching all of Dragon Strike after it. I was like, oh, I actually paused it because it was, I've heard your book a number of times, but I was on Audible and I was like, oh, I can't go further in this book until I've watched the entire Dragon Strike video. So I suppose, why did you do that to me is the question I have.
Love.
No, I don't, yeah, where are we going? Why are we talking about Dragon Strike?
I thought you had something to say. I can just talk some more.
Please.
Okay, I'm going to talk more. So, the insistence on TSR that they be able to develop Endless Quest books, in addition to the age being a factor, TSR kept the lights on and actually grew their bottom line despite the falling sales for a while because of the fiction line. Their ability to produce books set in the fictional worlds of D&D, by about this time, I want to say it was 50% of the gross-ish. So the books were absolutely huge because they sold a lot, they were cheap to make, and you could sell them outside of the D&D hobby. Other people would go and buy the Ravenloft books even if they weren't D&D players, and heck, maybe some of them would even go and start playing D&D. Because of that, I'm sure that's why they were so insistent on acquiring the rights to make books like that set in Middle Earth, because it was just the model. You make a game world, you make the novels to go with the game world. It's still... I go back and forth on what a Lord of the Rings D&D second edition product would have looked like. William W. Connors, who I think of one of the guiding hands of the Ravenloft line, he was going to be tasked with making some sort of a Lord of the Rings intro game. Maybe it would have been cool, maybe it wouldn't have been. I don't know. But it's a thing that we aren't going to see that we didn't have. I will further add that the snide tone in this is pretty upsetting. You'd think you'd be nice to the people that you want something from, not kind of snarky.
I think it's interesting. You know what I think is interesting?
What, Scott? What do you think is interesting?
Well, first of all, I think if we're going to talk about Endless Quest books, I think we have to bring up the person who sold Endless Quest
Rose
books, too.
Estes?
Thank you very much. I had written her name right there, but you got there before I did. I don't know if folks know the story. I mean, obviously, Choose Your Own Adventure books and the Endless Quest books and the Fighting Fantasy books. Oh, right. Professor Gutierrez, who's in the room
Tim
today.
Sensei.
Yes, runs Advanced Fighting Fantasy, which is a brilliant tabletop role-playing game basically based on the old Steve Jackson, Even Livingston. I don't know how many people in this room have played these, but the Warlock of Firetop Mountain and then the others are really, really well. And then sorcery books, which were even an adult version. It was so interesting that it took... Actually, here's a question. Neither of us know the answer to this, I'm thinking.
Great.
When did Choose Your Own Adventure books come out, and when did Endless Quest books come out? So the reason I'm telling this story is that Rose Estes, who came up with the Endless Quest ideas in TSR, had to walk into Gary Gygax's office and sell him on the idea. And when she did, his response was, sure, you write them then. Right? It wasn't we're going to put an entire department. It wasn't like they were going to put like the best writers of TSR onto creating these Endless Quest books. And it's funny because I've gone on eBay and I bought all of them for my kids because I love them. And like Rose Estes is actually fairly like, if there was a Choose Your Own Adventure Hall of Fame, she would be a bust on the Mount Rushmore of that. Like the books are actually fairly good, right? And because so many of them, the Choose Your Own Adventure style books aren't good, like the twist of plots. I mean, there's so many different things. But I think it's so interesting. And I'm because this is what I do, I'm going to take as far afield from the whole concept of business enterprises to think about how interested it is about the entanglement.
Do a shot. Say entanglement, do a shot.
Thank you very much. That's right. That's why we're here. Between literature and role-playing games. Like here we are having a conversation between the literature that inspires role-playing games and them like trying to get back into that field. And I think it's fascinating because I love the concept that they think they're different when they're completely not different. Like they're literally, the game is, I said this to my students the other day. I said, I had a picture of Gary Gygax on the PowerPoint, because I had a quotation for him about it. I always wanted to write the books that I wanted to read because I was telling my students, hey, if there's a book out there that you haven't read that you would like to, write it yourself. And here's a human being. And when I did this in class and I had the PowerPoint behind me, it's a picture of Gary Gygax from Futurama, by the way, because that's like their best cultural touchstone, right? Is that this is a human being who could not have a dialogue with we really are very Ben and Scott tonight. We're like you're money and I'm literature, right?
It helps that I picked a business text.
That's true. But like this is a human being who could not have a dialogue with literature. Like he could not just say, I'm going to read this book. I'm going to be fine with Robert E. Howard's cute little story about some guy. I have to inhabit this world. I have to find a way that I can impact the characters in this world. And what's also interesting is even though it was 1974, his medium, well, because it's how he'd grown up, his medium of choice was not actually a book. Despite the horse
crap.
Thank you, of this concept that he, like, if you read Appendix N, you would, and Gary Gygax was a prolific reader. Like, we're not going to get beyond that. That's completely true. But his medium of choice was always going to be the medium that was probably more important to him than any other, and that was wargaming and game playing. So when it came time to say, I want to have a dialogue with books, he didn't write a book back, he wrote a game back, which I think is really interesting in the concept of, like, how do we play with books? But I also think it's really interesting with the fact that the 1970s, 1980s, especially with the personal computer revolution, we're moving into this concept of how to create interactive media because we are tired of the concept of passive media. But I went a little too far, so take it over. Save me.
I hope.
Saving throw versus digression.
This is the thing I've been thinking about a lot lately, and so I hope I haven't said it a ton on the show. But about, 6 months ago now, I started a One Ring campaign with my group, and it's going really, really well. We're in Isengard. There's a spell cast on Saruman. We're going to save Saruman from the spell. It's going to be great. And after I come home from running a game of the One Ring, I feel like I have visited Middle-earth in some sort of real way. Obviously, it's fictional, but it feels real. It gives me the same feeling I get when I'm reading the Lord of the Rings novel. And how does that happen? And to what degree is Middle-earth therefore a real place that you can visit, even if it's an imaginary visit? Because, and again, it's that Middle-earth feeling. that to me is so unique to those novels. And it's one of the reasons I go back and keep rereading those novels, is that feeling. And I don't have any good answers here, but when I think about TSR making D&D settings and D&D novels set in those settings, it does occur to me that the same phenomenon would occur, where, like, if I played Ravenloft or I read Night of the Black Rose by Jim Lauder, it would give me that Ravenloft feeling. And you know, where does that come from? How does that happen? From a business point of view, it makes total sense that you would do that, because a novel is an easier way to enter that world than a role-playing game. You only need one person to visit Ravenloft if you're reading a novel. You don't need a whole group. And again, this is one of the most navel-gazy, like, hippie-ish things I think about, and I don't have any answers, so I hope that the question has some value, and I hope that Scott can help me, can be my shaman and guide me through my confusion.
I put 4 totems out. Here's my question to you, which is, do you think... No.
Yes!
I want to throw this yes. Perfect. We think yes. I'd like to throw this out to everyone. Do you mind?
Do it. This is what you do.
Do you think... This is 1992. When did Vampire come out?
The Masquerade?
No, the other one.
91? Yeah. Well, I mean, you mean the first edition of Vampire?
The White Wolf Vampire. I have no...
1991.
1991.
Right?
When did it become big? 1992?
Ravenloft, I mean, the module was 80s. But you mean the campaign?
No, I'm curious about Vampire the Masquerade. Like, I'm literally wondering when TSR started to have the kind of the weird 1990s competition from the more, like, weirdly narrative
Oh, you're wondering
cosplay
when
group.
they felt like White Wolf was competition
Yes,
to them?
thank you.
So, White Wolf directly affected the creation of Planescape. Zeb Cook...
That's interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah, Zeb Cook felt like those White Wolf games were really, really cool. They were having some amazing sales. They were sharing shelf space with TSR products and Walden Books, B. Daltons, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And you know, I would say that Zeb, I'm now putting words in his mouth, but based on my interview with him, I would say he felt inspired by them. Not like, oh, the kids today like the factions, so I'm going to put factions in Planescape. Zeb was like, that's cool. I'm putting factions in Planescape. He described them as philosophers with clubs, and he said that in addition to that, he was influenced by the Marco Polo book by the Italian guy. Invisible Cities by Italo Calvino.
You asked me to tell Calvino.
Yeah, you
failed.
failed.
I did, like, that was a 1. That was straight 1 right there, my literature save.
And Dictionary of the Khazars by a Serbian writer. So again, Zeb Cook also said that when he was designing Planescape, anytime he got a bad idea, he followed it and put it in the game. So if you're talking about White Wolf influence on TSR and D&D, you really see it in that product. And man, again, I think that Planescape was the highlight of the Silver Age at TSR.
You said that in your book.
It's a thing I say all the time. Sorry. Take the microphone.
Yeah, I'm sorry, but it's not a microphone, and that's the first time I touched it. By the way,
That's
it looks
fine.
It looks like a sound Smurf is what I was calling it in my head. Like,
I think it's a
hello,
Robotone.
jokey Smurf. Don't give me a little box that explodes in my hands. The question I had a few moments ago was, if TSR wins the rights, this is my question to the audience. If TSR wins the rights in 1992, would they have made a good game?
And if you have an
Thinking
answer,
about who's working there and what there
I'm
were.
just holding it. I'm going to take it to people who have an answer.
Yeah, what a great guy. I feel like we're on Oprah in 1997.
Anybody want to
No,
have
more
an
like
answer?
Donahue, actually. Caller is on the air. Would they have made a good game? 1992, was TSR capable of making a good Tolkien game? And the reason I'd asked about the whole White Wolf thing was because I was thinking about, like, what the pressures in the competition were, like what they would think about, like, the marketplace. This is what they had to do. Like, we've got to make some game where there's a bunch of teenagers in a room pretending to be vampires. So,
Okay.
They did their take on Tolkien with MERP, not the greatest acronym. It never felt right. Could TSR have done better? I think they could have gotten the setting, but when the mechanics started to interface with that, because you're going to shoehorn in wizards, you're going to shoehorn in clerics. As much as first and second edition was indebted to Tolkien heavily, I think you would have a disconnect.
Anybody else want to?
I'll just add on my brother's comment. With Ravenloft, where it was arguably a very different style game, I think it was doing horror less effectively because it was D&D as a system, as opposed to at the time what Call of Cthulhu was doing for horror, which was a system built purposely for horror. And I think if they had done a D&D style game, you would have gotten D&D with a thin veneer of Tolkien.
A schmear of Tolkien.
Schmear.
Gaming lawyer Greg Helding.
Oh, look at that.
Yes. I would say.
Could you describe your T-shirt briefly?
Oh yes, it's the Hobbit from the Bilbo Baggins Hobbit from the cartoon movie from. Yes. The only Hobbit film that exists. It's lovely, and I would say that in 1992 they still had the creative talent to make a good game. I'm guessing, based on the tone of the letters that we read, that they wouldn't have allowed that to happen.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point.
Okay, well, I'm really over my skis here, but I just like to basically talk about the fighting fantasy game books and possibly why the Tolkien estate was a little bit hesitant. I have no knowledge personally or done research on this, but just kind of a brief overview from the fighting fantasy game books that they were scheduled to be canceled in 1992, which would kind of correspond to when these negotiations were happening. So maybe that the Tolkien estate was following this, supposition only, right? That they were not as confident that a game book, which they were calling the in those quest books, would actually be financially successful.
Cool. Say that question one more time and a little bit louder.
Do we know it would be a new standalone game, or would it be a setting book for D&D?
So it almost certainly would have been a D&D second edition reskinned in some way to fit Tolkien. Something akin to Ravenloft, where they made some system changes for Ravenloft because it's a horror game. They probably would have made some system changes for Lord of the Rings, but the whole point is that they want people to eventually go and buy AD&D second edition and become AD&D second edition players. So that's the answer. That would be my guess. William W. Connors would be the primary if you want to follow up anyone with that. Anybody else want to say anything? Sorry, Jacob of Hot Springs Island.
Yeah, great. I mean, my guess would be that if TSR had been successful at making it, then the Tolkien guys would have been really angry about how it turned out based on, you had all the guys that were playing, Blackmore, and it's like, yeah, there were Balrogs, they were kicking in the door, we were holding the door shut, and I don't know that the Tolkien estate would have been happy, especially based on that letter. Like, I think it would have been too goofy in order for people to really love it. So, yeah.
You can hold on to a narrative if you start letting players play with it, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Like you can literally and I feel like that's interesting too. The whole what's the name? The Lord of the Rings online role-playing game. I think it's that's got to be the hardest game to make at all. Like you've literally got to stick to the lore. But I mean, you're literally running One Ring. Is that what it's called? Which every time I see, I'm sorry, Greg. I remember you were running it at Gamehole Con, and I was like, these are the coolest character sheets I've ever seen. This is so cool. But as I mentioned to you, I'm like, well, what do you do when they kill Sauron on page 3? Like, what do you make as the new villain? You literally are like, well, Frodo wasn't so good with the ring, and now he's Frodo Sauron, right? Like, there's nothing to do with it. Like, if you have it, and that's the problem with the intersections between literature and gameplay. Is it I'm sorry, can I say it allows you to fudge up? Like stories, not in the way that they're told. And that's the thing, is that's the problem with dialogues versus monologues. Because it was a monologue before Tolkien, and in the same way that we're talking about the Tolkien estate, they can control exactly what goes on or what the side stories are. But if you throw it into a game world, then you're going to have a whole bunch of people, Leroy Jenkins, into the Two Towers at some point, right? Sorry to take the Smurf.
Jacob said it's the problem of canon. Yeah, as
Oh, what a great! I mean, we could talk about canon.
we
all
have
night.
we have one more, we have one more. I'm sorry, sir. What was your name again? Clark. Yeah. Did you want to say something though?
Well, it's sort of going the same direction too, because it also feels like the state of the state of play at that point in time among fans would have also been people obsessing on, well, is Gandalf level 17 or 18 or 15? So I even wonder if the hobby would have been ready for it. And I'm trying to think of like any licensing up to that point in 1992 that had done well.
I was going to be derailing and goofy. I'm
Derailing,
sorry.
goofy.
So were you going to read from the Dungeon Master's Guide?
That is indeed being derailing and goofy.
I showed up and he said we're going to show 2 letters and do you have a British accent? And I was a couple beers in. I was like, not right now. Give me 2 more. Sure.
I have been told by our fans on Discord that they are here for the digressions, and I want to point out at least we read an entire complete text. You know, like should we? I know, despite Scott's best efforts.
I'm taking the Smurf.
I will throw out one thing since this is up here really quickly, and then I'll give it to Scott. But briefly, my understanding is the reason that there is no Harry Potter role-playing game, and there was not a Harry Potter role-playing game designed by Wizards of the Coast in the early 21st century, is because J.K. Rowling was simply upset at the idea of people telling stories in her world that she does not approve of, and that she has no control over. And that, like, they were pretty far along. They had agreements, games, like a game had been made, as I understand it, and at the very, I shouldn't say at the very end, but pretty far along in the process, J.K. Rowling is like, wait, they're going to do what? They're going to tell their own stories? No! Yeah. So now Scott's going to read from the Dungeon Master's Guide.
Am I really? I've never done that. He's always the one who does
Your
the
turn.
rings.
I have the Smurf! So for those of you at home, the Zoom mic I have looks like a black robotic Smurf.
And so we turn to page 370, who cares? And see what Lord Master Gygax has wrought. This is actually a good page. No,
well, it's 6:38. If we want to, we could open up to questions.
No, we should at some point. But you know what? I put it for 90 minutes, and these poor people signed up, so you have to stay for the whole...
We don't need to keep them for 90 minutes.
Oh, yeah, we do.
60 minutes is plenty. Then we can go drink.
I have a question.
Oh, actually, sounds...
He has a question. Let's let
You're going to talk over Lord Gygax?
Not anymore.
Here, let me get his question.
You got it. The Smurf has to...
Yeah.
Can I ask it before I do...
You want to ask him a question before you ask a question?
The problem of our podcast has always been... and I do want to. I'm not trying to be rude. The problem of our podcast has always been because there's this weird contingent of like literally. I swear there's like some person out there who like can't afford even like the first edition book, and he's like scribing it page by page, and he's like, one day I'll be able to play Dungeons and Dragons when you're done. There's a lot of folks who have complained to us to be like, would you please just get through one section per night, like without Scott saying, "Oh, I'm talking about quantum entanglement." And then there's another section who's always like, dude, that's great. Like, you guys should keep talking. And the problem is that we keep getting digressed because of like all of the things that are happening about tabletop role-playing games. And now that we are no longer, you may have heard this on the interwebs, no longer plot points, despite what the title says. We are trying to figure out what we're doing. So anybody that can give us suggestions or tell us to what you think we should be doing more of, or we should split the 2 shows off into Ben and I just shoot the poop versus just reading straight from the DMG and then talking about Thaco tables all day long, which I'm totally happy to do. We would love to get that feedback, but please.
But your question, sir.
Yes. In 1992, assuming money was no option, because we're talking trying to sell Tolkien estate on $25,000 a year, what company could have done Lord of the Rings right?
Nobody. That's why I brought up White Wolf. I was like, who else was in the field? Who was going to do it?
I mean,
Answer.
Who in 1992
Steve
could have
Jackson
done
games?
a good
GURPS Vampires.
Lord of the Rings role-playing game? That's a really good question.
It is a great question.
Take going back to 1992. Man.
Palladium? Palladium. Can you imagine Teenage Mutant Ninja Vampires? Let him answer. Their answers are better than us. Pick a Smurf. I can't stand them.
My immediate answer as I walk over to Jacob Hurst of Dark of Hot Springs Island fame is Jonathan Tweet. Jonathan tweeted and if he could have worked with Atlas Games in 1992 is my answer. Jacob.
I mean, but didn't TSR kind of already do it with like BX and?
I would.
Done it again.
Are you suggesting that BX was a Lord of the Rings style role playing game?
I mean, not necessarily, but I mean, like I think that early D&D is kind of it sort of already did it.
Scott agrees. I would say I think that BX was much more
as best as any game designer could have done in the 1980s, right? Like now we have so much. We have advanced so. No, we have not advanced. If we'd advanced, we'd still be watching kittens sing Immigrant Song on the internet. So, like, advancement isn't quite the right word, but I will say we are more sophisticated with the way that we think about game systems. I have been playing nothing but DCC and Shadow Dark nonstop within the next couple weeks. And I can't say, I literally can't, like, I love old school essentials. And weirdly enough, after playing both, I'm like, I could run a 5-year campaign on old school essentials, no problem. But I would be itching the whole time, like there was something in the back. Like there are still some advancements that we have made that are interesting. But to that point, as far as like the best way to recreate in a ludic experience, yeah, I guess that was my point. Like by the way, I have never played a single White Wolf game in my life.
I'll run one for you.
You've said that like 9 times, and
we've only gamed once in our whole lives, and it was this week finally. Thank God. No, I would to give your question a more fulsome answer. Say Jonathan Tweet in 1992. I want to say he was selling stock options in not Galena, Illinois, somewhere Rock Island, Illinois. I think in 1992 he had already designed Ars Magica. And he is a designer who was, functionally unemployed as a designer, had the ability to think radically, ask the right questions. I would put a strong bet on Jonathan Tweet, 1992, Atlas Games. Again, we'll never know, but what a fun question. Other questions?
The Middle-earth role-playing license, was it revoked or did it expire?
So, thank you for asking that excellent... Oh, my God! That explains everything! That question explains everything. So, let us talk about the end of Iron Crown Enterprises and the Middle-earth role-playing game. Iron Crown Enterprises, which had a license to create a role-playing game set in Middle-earth from Salzance Enterprises, considering the role-playing game a film product in some way, shape, or form. They put out the role-playing game. Monty Cook was hired and started working there. And then one day, Monty Cook comes to work, and there's a notice from the sheriff on the door saying that this property has been seized for lack of payment on rents, as I recall. And what happened was this. Iron Crown Enterprises started to print choose-your-own-adventure books called Tolkien Quest. And they printed, I want to say, millions of copies of these. They thought they had a license to do this because they considered it a game product. However, because it was in book form, and again, the licensing here, I'm remembering as best I can. I'm sure the internet will correct me. But for some reason, choose-your-own-adventure books are not considered a game product. Therefore, they didn't have the right to do it. Therefore, they were sued by the Tolkien estate, and they were sued into oblivion. which explains everything. Of course. Yeah. Of course the Tolkien estate would be like, we don't want to do choose your own adventure books. We just had this nightmare experience with Iron Crown Enterprises. We didn't want them to do it. We sued them to stop them because they were doing it illegally. You can totally see how less than a decade later they would be like, no, we're not going to let another American company do this. Full stop. Amazing question. Thank you very much. So good. So good.
You're very excited there.
I am. I mean, it's not, sometimes...
Ben Riggs, can I ask you a couple questions?
Sure.
What's your favorite edition of Dungeons & Dragons? Because you call 3rd edition a masterpiece.
Yeah, I do.
Can we... Why?
3rd edition is a masterpiece.
I'm totally taking different tactics.
Because it is the culmination...
I know I asked you a question, but I can't stop talking. Ben and I, when we record this podcast, are never in the same room, by the way. We live in this not that far, not far from each other. But
we started during COVID though. So we did well.
So I mean, yeah, I won't say too much about our lives, but I record in a room that is from there to here because I live in a small little town in Wisconsin. So it's fun.
It's like a Japanese living room.
Basically, yeah. Professor Gutierrez would probably be the expert on that. That being said, it's weird to do this where I can actually see your expressions because mostly I just assume that you're agreeing with me. Why is So now I'm going to ask you a bunch of questions just to give you grief. Why is 3rd edition so good when it's totally not? I'm kidding. I'm kidding about that one.
Yeah, so 3rd edition is amazing because it fulfilled on the promise of 1st edition.
Okay.
It in the same way that 1st edition was like, we're going to have a rule for everything. We're going to allow you to simulate the universe through this rule set. But 1st edition was broken like a 75-year-old in Midsummer.
All right.
Second edition was not allowed to do the fixes it needed to do, and 3rd edition they went and did the fixes. And again, I think it was too much. But again, intriguingly, I played 3.5 last year with a couple women under 30, and one of them was like, 3.5 is my favorite edition. And again, like 5th edition was all she'd played up until that point. And there are clearly still people that love 3rd and 3.5. Now, my favorite edition would be Beckme.
Sure.
That would be my favorite edition.
That's probably pretty popular answer.
Yeah, here especially.
Yeah. Can I ask you to do me a big Smurf question? Do you mind asking everyone in the audience what they're... Can I do it?
You can do it.
Okay. I've been walking all day, man.
I can do it.
You have to, so when I bring this to you, caller, we're on the air. You have to say what your favorite edition of Dungeons and Dragons is, and then you have to give me at least one sentence. Oh my gosh, I'm teaching again. And then you have to give me one sentence, at least one sentence, and then you have to write it down, and then you have to also finish the quiz. No, seriously, just one sentence. Why that's your favorite edition?
Thank you for this opportunity to speak, Dr. Brunner.
You're welcome, and thank you for using the correct appellation.
Doctor to doctor.
There you go.
Probably Beckme, because that is where we got on board the D&D train.
Okay.
So it has a lot of nostalgia value. 5th edition is wonderful. It's what I play a lot of.
Sure.
But, it brings up that just moment of opening up that red book and my poor little cleric being killed by a carrion crawler.
I don't remember this.
So my brother was the DM that did that.
The Tom Oldvay edition, that's my favorite. It's my favorite. It's the best writing ever. Yeah. Oh, I just want to talk for hours, but evidently I have to go walk through the room. Favorite edition of D&D?
I got to go with
why?
my brother, Beckme.
Why?
Because you open that red... That's what I said! Book.
Are you guys twins?
We are.
Should never have asked.
And it is, in my opinion, the most successful product at combining presentation, art, accessibility.
See, that's the problem, is I wanted to ask this question of everybody, but they got the answer right.
Twin power.
Form of a bucket, shape of an elephant.
Okay, so having played in the Founders and Legends tournament this past weekend, we did every version of the advanced game.
The Tower Gygax thing. Sorry.
From OD&D to 5th edition. And I would say original 1974 D&D.
Why?
For me now, because I've experienced it. And I understand the spark of the game that had people like Goodman Games put DCC together, and Shadow Dark owes its roots to that, and some of the old school Renaissance stuff. It just was so much. You would have thought it would be unapproachable or hard to play or more difficult,
Yeah.
but it was actually
No.
very simple.
I agree.
And it was a lot of fun, and it was just sort of pure D&D fun when we played it, and I will do it again.
Much better than cats.
Basic D&D, specifically for nostalgia homes basic. Yeah.
Nice.
But it's terrible to learn to play from.
That was, by the way, an actual haiku.
Well, with a nearly 40-year gap in my recollection of AD&D and then a big, huge time jump to 5e, I'll probably just say AD&D.
Why?
Because of nostalgia, the art is best.
By the way, nobody's getting out of this.
I'm sure this is nostalgia, but I'm going to say AD&D First Edition because I've been playing the white box, and as someone who played the white box, it felt like this explosion in what this could be. Right?
Sure, yeah.
And at the age of 14, I'm not paying attention to the writing. I'm not paying attention. It's just like, look at all this art. Look at all this stuff. Oh, my God. Now I can really go to town on this, right? Classes. I never even thought about these classes. What's a monk? What the hell is, it's just, it was so expanding at the time.
That's a great question. It's like, when was that moment about, you have to finish this question first, I swear. But what's that moment where you're like, when you moved from like, oh, this is the greatest game ever, but I have to follow the rules, to like, oh, fudge the rules, we can do whatever we want. Like that had to be like, and to me that was like 39, right? Because I'd always assumed, I always joke about, I've mentioned this to other Gygaxes when I was a kid, like when I would read the DMG aloud, I said this on the podcast like many times when we were first starting. When I saw Gary Gygax in my mind, he's nothing. In my head, the way that he looked was nothing like the actual Gary Gygax. He was this dude who was like 6'3" and had these like big glasses and was like this professorial type who did nothing but algorithms because when I was 8, I had decided that he had literally broken down the world into nothing but equations. And the only way, like, I was going to say Russell Crowe in A Perfect Mind, but that wasn't even right, because even he's, like, too pudgy. Like, I literally saw this guy who was, like, a genius. He strode into a room who was, like, 12 feet tall and was, like, so I knew you were going... It was, you know what it was? Benedict Cumberbatch and Sherlock. That's who Gary Gygax was when I was, like, 9 years old. He'd be like, I see you. You're chaotic neutral. You have 4 hit points and your charisma, too. Right? And then when you kind of find out and you're like, oh, it's pretty much me as a kid. What's the best edition of D&D and why?
I don't like rules.
I can't even say to that.
That's
like,
why my book is system neutral.
Have you made your own game?
I made Hot Springs Island, but it's
Right,
like a
maybe-
setting. Yeah, I know. So yeah, he was announcing me.
Yeah, but that's the best part. Is like you've literally like everyone is like there's like 20 purchases of.
Award-winning man.
I am. I guess.
I'm an award-winning game
We haven't
designer.
won any awards.
You may have heard of me from such.
Started off playing 2nd edition in high school, having a big gap, 20-year gap maybe. Went back to 3.5, and that's currently what we're playing right now. So I'm going to say 3.5
Sure.
just because second edition, kind of it was all theater of the mind, and we were always having to go with the DM, like I want to do this, and you have to modify it, whereas 3.5 kind of codified all that. But at the same time, it slowed the game down when it comes to combat. So it's a mix, but I'm still going to go with 3.5.
Yeah.
Yep, 3.5 Pathfinder for me, mostly just all the
He's my
levers
DM,
and
by the way.
whatever.
Are you guys are you still playing Pathfinder 1E or Pathfinder 2E?
Still 3.5. Never made
Really?
it.
Really?
Own everything Pathfinder First Edition. Never cracked it.
Are you running like any adventure paths, or are you doing like straight up which one?
7 years into Age of Worms. Yeah.
That's so brilliant. Like I'm literally envious right now. Of two things. One, that's a brilliant adventure path, but also the rules are really, they're rough. Like, how do you deal with the rules? Like, how many players do you have in your campaign?
I'm like losing sanity. running the game.
Right? Like, the grappling rules are 37 pages long, and I'm not.
To prep, I'm like, oh god, it's like a wall of stats. But
Yeah, I mean, we're actually just finding out here in the last 6-7 months that we've been interpreting some of the rules wrong.
yeah,
Wait,
we
yeah.
actually start reading.
There's no interpreting the rules wrong. There's no interpreting the rules wrong. How many people are in your group?
Probably about 6 or 7.
One, two.
We don't only
four,
play that.
five,
We have other.
six.
No, yeah, it's cool.
6 in just the Age of Worms.
Yeah.
We had 7. Actually, we had 8.
Yeah.
One of our friends passed away, so we had a year where we didn't play at all.
That's right. There's a wall of remembrance. You can add your friend
Yeah,
to.
it's on there.
Yeah.
Strong current. We've kind of segued into DCC and MCC a lot too to get that old school feel. It's a little fun to play with.
Just the other.
Yeah, there's like a side group or whatever. But
There's always side groups. There's never the main group. All right, I have the Smurf. So now I feel like I should mix it up here as I walk back. So why don't we? I really do feel like Phil Donahue. Why don't we throw it? So thank you all for coming, but before you leave,
Are we getting a drink somewhere?
in an hour and a half, because I decided that we're going to keep going. This is an obviously weird opportunity. So why don't we take questions for another 10 minutes?
Hey everybody, it's Ben Riggs. I hope you enjoyed our GaryCon live episode. If you like what you just heard and want to make sure you keep getting more of it, please back us on Patreon. Patrons can join our Discord and get the satisfaction that for less than the price of a cup of coffee per month, they are keeping this show going. Thanks everybody. Bye.